Money is really just a construct, right? It's something that lives out there, and it really is always just reflecting how we're showing up, who we're being, what actions we're taking, what actions we're not taking. You know, it's easy to look on social media or an Insta reel and say, that person's so together, or that person educates on money, or that person, you know, but behind every person is a real life story. And this is my real life story.
The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash Etchman from Tash Invest and Anna Christina from Perla. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. From coast to coast, across land, waters, and communities, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club podcast,
where we take you from beginner to confident investor,
where we can teach you everything you need to know about investing.
So come get rich slow with us. We've got a great episode today. We have Marion Mays on the show. She is a behavioral coach who specializes in helping clients develop their financial IQ and EQ, and is a passionate property educator. She's driven to help people get out of their own way and do things they thought they could never do. So we're excited to have Marion on the show. Thanks so much for coming.
Absolute pleasure. I'm excited to be here with both of you today.
Great. Well, we always kick off a show with a money win or a loss of the week. Do you have something that you want to share?
I have a great money win, for all the pet lovers listening. Leica dog food. So I'm not sure if you know what that is.
No, I don't have a dog.
It's dog food that humans can eat. And it's made by this incredible woman, I think she's Melbourne-based, that created this business in lockdown. And it's delivered to your home, so 2 weeks food supply. And when you sign up, you get a 30% discount. And when you refer somebody to buy the food, you get a 50% discount.
Oh, wow. That's a big discount.
It's a big discount. So it means like 2 weeks worth of dog food at the 50% discount came in at under $100 for 2 weeks to feed our border collie.
Nice.
So I think that's a pretty good win.
Amazing. So if you need a referral, go to Marion. She'll hook you up.
Yeah. I've got 4 more 50% discounts I can get.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Have you tried it? Is it tasty?
Actually, I have tried it, and my son and I both tried it. I mean, we had to, right? Because the ad said it's dog food that humans can eat.
Yeah.
We got the kangaroo one, and unfortunately, neither of us are kangaroo eating fan. I mean, we love kangaroos. We just don't
want to eat them.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, fair enough.
A bit too gamey for us.
It is a very gamey taste.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a good one. What about you, Tash?
Just a note on the dog food. At the Coles I used to go to in Canberra, they had this dog food kind of stand, and it looked so pretty and nice. It looked like a biscuit stand for humans, and it took me so long to click that it was actually like a dog food dispenser thing, because it was just like, it looked like the macarons that you see, but no, it was just fancy dog food.
Self-serve.
So I've been curious to feel like, would they actually be nice or not?
I've seen that in cafes where cafes now sell like little dog biscuits for dogs. And I'm like, I want that one.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, it's the dog one, not the human one. Yeah.
They're making them look very, very gourmet and good these days.
Fancy.
Yes, my money win. I used to have a Kindle because I really like to read. I've read, I think, 61 books so far this year. So the price of that can add up pretty quickly because I do like to buy the new releases sometimes. But I got gifted a Kobo recently because I've been annoying them on Instagram and tagging them and stuff. And I found out on Kobo you can download library books for free.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's
and
really
the
cool.
library, like the area that I'm from in Melbourne now, you can borrow 40 books at a time. So you can download 40 books on your Kindle. On your Kobo. Not yet. I got a bit excited and I've downloaded like 20 and then I had to, because you do have to go on hold for some of the more popular ones because they can only you can only borrow a certain number at a time. Well, they can only borrow to a certain number of people. But yeah, I've got like heaps on my wait list now as well. So I'll just keep coming.
Great.
It's so much better than a Kindle.
Yes. Oh, is it? I don't know. I haven't tried it. I've only had a Kindle.
It's free.
Okay, fair
like
enough.
Kindle, you have to pay for stuff unless you do like
true.
the weird hack to try and download books illegally, which I don't recommend. But Kobo, you just like download them from the library.
I'm all about the audiobooks. I just, I still have like this big physical book that I need to finish, and audiobooks is where it's at.
Love a physical book though.
I agreed, but hard with humans, little humans, not, they get in the way of reading.
What's yours?
Mine is, I spent $15 on getting my eyebrows threaded, and I used to go in the city and it was like closer to $25. So I think that now that I found a local place that's $15, pretty cheap, hop out on my lunch break.
They look good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Amazing.
They're $15.
Perfect.
Yeah. So let's kick it off. Marion, you've done some incredible stuff. You've helped money coach a lot of couples and countless people over the years. But I know you have a unique story yourself of how you've kind of overcome finances and thinking about that. Can you share that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that driving here today, like being in the studio with both of you. And obviously I sit at the other end of the age spectrum. So I'm kind of, for those listening, you know, the woman in her mid-50s, soon to be 54 actually, and have the benefit of hindsight. Yeah. So my journey starts with, I started investing in my early 20s. So the first investments that I ever bought were commercial properties.
That's a hectic first investment.
Yeah.
Right? My friend said, let's meet in Collins Street for a coffee. And by the end of that meeting in Collins Street for a coffee, we'd bought a commercial property in Collins Street.
Can you I know you're going to keep going on with your story, but can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So my friend invited me to view this commercial property and I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm thinking about buying it as an investment. I've crunched all the numbers. It'll pay for itself. It's all good. And then he's like, would you be interested? And I'm like, I'd be too scared actually at 25 or 26 to buy a commercial property. And he was like, why don't we just do it together? Why don't we just go 50-50? And I was like, okay. And we had a coffee, and at the end of it, I was, committed to buying 50% of a commercial property in Collins Street.
Was that always the plan? Was that his plan to be like, hey, I'm going to have a coffee and try to convince someone to buy property with me?
I don't know. It might have been his plan. Wasn't my plan.
That's
I just wanted to go for the coffee.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be a great investment, and we ended up buying another commercial property together, and then we ended up buying a residential property together as well. So
much to unpack here. How much did you trust this person back then? Were you really good friends for a while? That's
when you meet those people that feel like you've known them forever, and you might have just met them, and on every level you feel safe, in your nervous system, in proximity, you just feel comfortable. It was that kind of scenario. He was actually, I won't go into that story because that's like a bottle of wine story, but he was actually the boss of my friend, and my friend asked me to cover her work while she got married at his company. So I was sitting, I went to their company and I was working and I met him there, and we'd only known each other that time, I'd say less than 12 months.
Wow. Okay, I won't derail the rest of this, but that's so amazing. What a cool start to investing.
Yeah, it was, which kind of begins the story because that one acquisition held me in really good stead. And my backstory on a personal note is that both my parents passed when I was in my early 20s, and I didn't have a big inheritance. And I just like to say that because people kind of go, okay, early 20s, buying commercial property, massive inheritance. No, I borrowed all of the money from the bank, 100% of it, and bought those properties. And so I had that asset. I had those two assets. And then I went on, I was in financial services. So just for the backstory, I've spent 30 years in financial services and 20 years in the property sector. And I was a late bloomer in terms of having children. So it wasn't until I was about 38 that I found myself having my first child. And I feel like I'm running through the bullet point of all the negatives, but just to give you context of all of the things that can happen and often do happen, as women, as we journey through life. I found myself needing to be hospitalized when I think I was 4 months pregnant. And I spent the rest of my pregnancy actually in hospital. And I share that with you because yay, income protection insurance. If I didn't have it, I don't know what I would have done. And then my son was born, he's almost 17 now. And unfortunately, about a month or two after he was born, we found out that he had a tumor behind his right eye. And so began my journey in terms of staying home and being the primary carer for him and looking after him. So in terms of talking about my backstory, in terms of about building wealth, just in that little snippet there, you can see there are periods where I'm in hospital and I'm not able to earn income, but I had income protection insurance. I actually became, through unfortunate circumstances, the sole parent and primary carer of my son when he was about 7 months old. So I navigated that, and then I stayed home and looked after him for about the first 6 years of his life. And so there's a period of not having any income. And I share that from the place of, people often say, how did you do that? How did you even survive? I had assets and I had equity in those assets, and I had savings and I had an income buffer. So I had that safety backup plan, if you will. And then after my son went to primary school, I went back to work. And as soon as I was earning income, I started buying assets again. And yeah, so that's kind of an overview of my backstory, navigating just real life, things that unexpectedly happen that we don't plan for, and then how my financial circumstances sat alongside those life experiences.
That's so hard. Those are some like really challenging.
Oh my God, just listening being like, wow, it just,
I'm like, am I going to cry now?
Yeah. I mean, like, I can't even imagine losing your parents at such a young age, navigating a lot of that by yourself, being hospitalized.
5 months in hospital.
That is so challenging.
Huge, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's like,
I think it's important. I think that when, it's easy to look on social media or an Insta reel and say, that person's so together, or that person educates on money, or that person, but behind every person is a real life story. And this is my real life story.
And it's really easy to be a bit optimistic and be like, oh, that'll never happen to me. Like life's going to be like, go to my plan and not really plan for that stuff. But things do happen that you won't expect, and you do need to be prepared for it.
All of what I just shared with you was completely unexpected. Did I ever imagine growing up? I come from a very close family that I would be orphaned in my early 20s? Never. Did I ever imagine that I would have my first child and I would be hospitalized? I mean, I was still trying to get out of bed and go to work, and they were like, no, you have to stay here. Did I ever anticipate through unfortunate circumstances that I would become a sole parent and the primary care of a child at 7 months old who had a tumor? None of that was in my life plan.
Yeah. And there are so many people in those situations. You did make some great financial decisions. You had insurance, you bought property, all of those, like it could have been so much worse, right? And we see that quite a bit with women over the age of 55 being are in poverty or are homeless. And a lot of that has to do with not having the ability to make some of those financial decisions when you're younger, going through divorce, losing a lot of that, losing years of not working. I know that that's a part of your drive and your passion in terms of what you do as well, right?
Absolutely, which is why I'm such a huge fan of both the work that each of you do, because you can catch women early enough and you can be the cheerleaders and the champions to say that there's another way. And I think every woman's listening to this, with the value of hindsight, we would all wish that we bought assets that went up in value over time. We would all wish that we had savings and safety backup plans for when things, took a left turn.
Yeah.
A bit more of like the practical side, because I know some people will be curious. You said you bought commercial property. How did you go living off those assets when you needed to draw down on them? Did you have shares and other things that produced an income as well?
So firstly, in relation to the commercial properties, we had loans against the commercial properties, and those loans had a redraw facility in them or equity available. And so literally what I did was I lived a modest lifestyle and I set myself an amount. So I wasn't just randomly drawing down $10,000 a month because that's what I, wanted to live on. I said to myself, I made up an annual salary. I think it was $50,000 or $60,000. I can't remember the exact figure. And I would draw down just that amount per month. And I would live from that amount. And I needed to do that for a number of years. And I remember people saying to me, oh, what you're doing is really silly because, you're creating...
Really silly? What else were you meant to do? What?
Yeah, what's the alternative?
Oh, I hate people giving random advice like that when you're like, this is what I'm doing to survive. And people are like, well, you shouldn't draw down on things. Like,
I think it was the debt lens. I think it was like, what are you doing? Like, you're just creating debt. And I was like, that is true. But I'm making the interest payment to the bank every month because it's an interest-only payment, and it was a commercial property, keeping in mind. So the tenant's rent far exceeded the mortgage payments, and the tenants paid for all the outgoings. But my retort to that is, yes, I was creating debt, but the asset was also going up in value over time. And more importantly, my son was a baby and had a tumor, and we could live a dignified life, and we could have housing security, and he could have medical treatment, and I could not be a stressed out mother because I was so worried about money.
That's the whole point of building wealth, is to have those assets in times like this. It's not to just keep accumulating for the sake of it.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that makes me so angry when people say stuff like that.
Everyone has wants to give advice when it's not their situation, but unless they're in that situation and you have to make some of those tough choices,
I can't, going back to what you were saying earlier, Anna, navigating difficulty in life, not to make this, session too heavy, but it's hard enough in its own right when you're navigating some of the things that we've just spoken about. But navigating those things without money and navigating those things without housing security there's no way I could have done the stint in a hospital when I was pregnant. And if I didn't have the income protection insurance and I was stressed out of my brain worrying about how I'm going to pay rent and how I'm going to pay for all my expenses.
Yeah. And it's great to hear it from a perspective of, been there, done that in a way where if you're younger, you can take a lot from this. I know one of the things that you say is like, I don't want to see women be another statistic. I don't want to see them in poverty or homelessness. What are some of the tips that you wish you could instill into younger people who are kind of navigating life now?
Well, I think, meeting reality where it's at. And I think that's harder when you're in your early 20s. I mean, I was in my early 20s when my parents passed, and I was in my 30s when I had my first child, and I kind of lived that big, ambitious dream life, like nothing will ever happen to me and I'll be okay. And it happens to other people. And the reality is it does happen to other people like you and I. And so the first thing I would say is that obviously investing, that's a given, that you take any amount from what you earn and you actually invest it so it can grow in value and take care of your future self. And I think in those examples, I was so lucky because it was my past self that was actually taking care of my future self at those times. But I think this, and I always advocate, and I work, as you know, specifically with women in their prime, and that's my big passion project. I think you have to put in place the layers of protection based on the unexpected happening. And if that looks like income protection insurance, I advocate that every woman should have income protection insurance. I advocate that every woman should have an emergency fund because life happens. I have an emergency fund. It goes up and down all year long. Yeah. Many unexpected things happen for me in a 12-month period. I have an income safety buffer. Now, as a self-employed person, cash flow is always interesting and moves a lot. And, for some people, it's, they feel comfortable with a 3-month income buffer so that they could cover all their living costs for 3 months. I'm self-employed, so I like a little bit more comfort than that. So I advocate these things. I advocate having, powers of attorney in place so that if something happens to you, somebody can step in and make financial decisions on your behalf without all your financial affairs turning to a bad situation. I advocate that women have estate planning and wills and all of these things sorted out. And, you might be listening to this and going, God, like that's a lot of stuff, right?
But it's so important.
But life is a lot of stuff, right?
It's so important to do it now before things start happening because it's really hard to start sorting through that stuff if you're in the middle of like a big crisis happening.
Yeah, you really can't. It's interesting. I worked with a young woman recently who was having her first child, and she's a senior exec earning, over $250,000. And I don't know, I think she was maybe 30 weeks pregnant and she had no income protection insurance. And I said, we really need to get this sorted because do you know that if you're 36 weeks pregnant and you want to get income protection insurance, you can't. So she actually got her income protection insurance like the day prior or 2 days prior to her 36 week of pregnancy. So sometimes the opportunity to do these things when you're in a difficult situation are no longer there or no longer available. Like trying to borrow money when you've been made redundant or retrenched or you're in a bad financial situation kind of doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or trauma insurance as well.
Yeah, just the emotions that come with it. We did the power of attorney stuff with some of my grandparents recently, and it was quite hard because it had gotten like to the point where everyone was very emotional about it and people hadn't made the decisions when they probably could a little bit earlier. So it's quite hard if you haven't had those conversations while you actually know what someone wants beforehand.
Absolutely.
And you want to protect yourself. You want to protect yourself, your family, your future. And what a great way to be like, hey, past self or like now self is going to look out for future self. So I'm going to get these things, get them done. There's so many things online that can facilitate even just writing a will. Like how many people do not have a will? You don't want to be in a situation where people are mourning you and then have to kind of figure that out as well. So I think such great tips there. I'm going to switch it a little bit. I know you talk about EQ and IQ. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Money EQ and money IQ. Well, our IQ is our level of intelligence or literacy, if you will, around finances. And there's lots of financial literacy available today. When I started back 10 years ago when I left corporate, saying you're a money coach or you were teaching people about money, people were like, what is that? Yeah. Are you a financial planner? And you'd be like, no, I teach people about money. And they're like, huh. So
I still get that today.
Yeah. Do you?
What is there to teach about money?
Yeah. What do you mean? You just invest.
Yeah.
Being like, financial planners actually aren't that good about teaching people about money. But
that's true, because that's not their role to teach. So financial literacy, and I think that as human beings, we don't do what we don't understand. Yeah. So it's just a reality. We just don't do what we don't understand. And so I think developing your financial literacy and having an understanding then leads to financial capability, because it's the practice of doing something and having financial literacy that gives you the financial capability. Like, I can actually do this. I can actually open a share account. I can actually, do these things. Money EQ, jumping over to the other side, is why we do what we do, or our emotional relationship in the context of money. Yeah. And I think you will both agree that emotions pretty much drive everything that we do in life. Yeah. Yeah. The work that we choose to do, who we choose to partner with in life, how we show up, all of the things. And for many of us, we have emotional relationships with money that are counterintuitive to what our logical brain says that we want. And often those emotional aspects of ourselves were formed a long time ago, like when we were kids, between the ages of about 2 and 12. And now we're delving into the behavioral science side of things, where, our subconscious brain is being programmed constantly as a young child. I know you have 2 children.
No, not yet. Not
just
yet.
checking. So our children are subconsciously observing and watching us, and their subconscious brain is being programmed. And that subconscious brain, for most of us, all of us adults actually, 95% of everything that we do comes from our subconscious brain.
I find those stats so scary. And you think, like, when you realize that all your decisions are kind of made not by you actively. You're like,
it's
great.
like a 7-year-old running the show.
Yeah.
Often in my life it shows up. My son's like, Mom, you're the parent in this operation. I'm like, yep.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
I know. So, it's really interesting, the emotional side of why we do what we do, or why we don't do what we should do. And to make it more real or more accessible for the listeners, like, what would that look like in the real world? How would that show up? An example that I can give you is that I worked with a woman last year, a very successful woman, made a lot of money, had been to many financial planners, but her conundrum was that she couldn't stop getting rid of money. Like, literally, no matter how much money she earned, she had all these sophisticated ways to get rid of money.
Can we be friends? No, I'm kidding.
I said to her, can I get invited to your dinner party? Because I know it's going to be impeccable wine. So she, whether that was shouting everyone at the restaurant or buying expensive gifts, and it was a real issue. She was married, they have children, and it was causing strain on the marriage and strain on the family. And she was just like, I do not know. I mean, she's an intelligent woman who ran her own very successful company. I cannot figure out why I keep doing this. Why do I just keep getting rid of money? And so she became a client, and through the work that we did together, when we delved into her subconscious beliefs and some of her past story, is she had an experience in childhood before the age of 10 where she walked into her family home with her parents, and they had been robbed, and they were targeted because they were a wealthy family. And so she, in that moment, made a decision that having too much money and being wealthy is unsafe. So by default, because she's skilled and talented and amazing, she made lots of money, but she had this subconscious programming that said it's just not safe to have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so she would just continue to get rid of money.
I worked with someone who was in a lot of debt, and they were really struggling to save and get out of debt. And they kept kind of, like, every week I was speaking to them, and they would have bought something else. They couldn't, like, get past it. And then they finally shared a memory of when they were younger, they broke something, and their dad was so angry that they would break this thing and waste this money. And he had kind of held on to that memory of things were worth so much more than he was. And he had lots of self-esteem things to do with around himself and objects and things that he was buying. But it's, wild to think about, like, it's something that happened so long ago, and we really hold on to that.
And, money is really just a construct, right? It's something that lives out there, and it really is always just reflecting how we're showing up, who we're being, what actions we're taking, what actions we're not taking.
And it's not just like money as well. When you think about exercise or eating healthy, like we all know that we should probably go for more walks, but there's just something that stops us from doing that sometimes. And we're just like, we should do that, but we just don't do it.
It's those deep beliefs, right? Like we all have our own deep beliefs in so many different ways, not just money, right? It can be exercise, it can be food, it can be self-image, it can be all these things. And that's what makes us unique who we are. But unless we take the time to take a step back and be like, why do I feel this way? What is my relationship with this idea, this construct? It's only then that we can unpack those understandings and like move forward through some of that stuff, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really interesting because I've worked with a lot of women over the last 10 years, like a lot across Australia and around the world, and it's universal. And if you think about the situation of, let's say we've got a woman who is an under-earner, where in the financial ecosystem is that woman going to get help for being an under-earner? Is she going to go to a financial planner and say, I'm an under-earner, help me?
And they're like, sorry, no, you've not got enough money. Yeah.
If she goes to a financial counselor, I don't earn enough money. And 10 times out of 10, what I find, whether employees or self-employed under-earners, it's really a relationship with self, and it's limiting beliefs about the relationship with self that they have that keep them stuck in a mindset of, I'm not worthy or I'm not deserving. And simply money reflects that for them.
Yeah. And like, this isn't for me. I'm not going to earn this money. I could never do that. I see it like all the time over social media. People are like, oh, well, you can do that, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z, instead of just taking charge of what they could do.
Exactly.
How do you actually help people get unstuck from this? I know like you've spent ages working with clients.
I hypnotize. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
One session, they're all good. No.
I have a friend who hypnotizes everybody, but no, I don't hypnotize them.
That's next on the list for you to learn.
Next qualification.
The first thing is understanding, what do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about others? And what do we believe about the world that we live in? And it is from this premise that we shape our entire life. And so the first thing for me is really digging into somebody's money story and money history and understanding as early as back as, what was your first money memory? And then what was your pattern of doing money when you had it available as a resource? So then we're looking for pattern recognition, because that tells you that on autopilot, they believe something and they're doing this consistently with money. I also believe that all of us sitting here and everyone listening, innately we know our own truth. We might have layers and layers and layers of conditioning and stuff upon us or other people's criticisms or views, but innately we know our own truth, and sometimes all it takes is the right support to help us peel back some of those layers. And so when I ask a fully fledged adult with compassion, what do you think your money story is? Like that, they know. Yeah. And usually it's got nothing to do with money.
Yeah.
Well, 10 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with money.
It's more of that emotional side, right?
About what they believe about themselves and who they are in the world, what they believe about others, i.e. how they will be treated in the world, and what they believe about the world. So to answer your question, Tash, so once you have a set of beliefs, it's then a matter of exploring, do those beliefs serve the life that I want to have, or do they not serve the life that I want to have? And the other thing is, in behavioral science, we say that the human mind distorts and deletes information all of the time. And if you've ever had an argument with someone you really care about, like a really heated argument, where you're both going, rah, and then there's a moment when no one understands or remembers what it is we were arguing about.
My partner always remembers. I never remember.
I have notes. If there's a point I have, I write it down.
Or you're recalling the argument, at a dinner party to friends, and they're telling a version and you're sitting there thinking, was I there for that? Like, did that really happen?
When there's like a big aha moment, I'm like, we need to write this down. Yeah. Don't forget this.
Yeah. Yeah, so going back to what I was saying, so in terms of your beliefs, we also have to challenge what we believe to be true about ourselves, others, and the world. And most often than not, the beliefs that we hold are a distorted view based on, our experience in our earlier years. From that place, we talk about what we call reframing our beliefs, so that they do serve us, or letting go of old beliefs, or developing new beliefs, So that's the work that we do. And it's really interesting because I work in the context of doing a 90-day process with people, which doesn't sound like a really long time, but the work is quite profound, and the results they get in terms of tangible results, like outcomes with money, is quite impressive and quite impactful, and we rarely talk about money. So we're usually doing this kind of inner work.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I always find that interesting, right? Like so many people will be like, oh, you need to do the things, right? Like you need to invest, you need to think about money, you need to maybe do the budgeting. But so much of it is taking a step back first, right? Like really understanding yourself. Like what are the beliefs that you have? Why are you doing what you're doing? Like even just listening to you right now, I was thinking about like my money story, and there's so many different parts of my money story. But one of the things that I've never really thought back to unpack was how I would always save money. I would go travel, I'd be broke. I'd go and save money, I'd travel and I'd be broke. And in listening to you right now, I was like, there's stuff there that I need to probably unpack in my like current situation, even though I'm not saving and traveling in the same way that I was.
All of us.
But you realize like there were these patterns that I held on for years that I've done. And how is that idea or what I was doing at that time, how is that affecting me now or not if I'm not doing that, right? Like, anyways, long story short, that just made me like reflect on my thing.
Book in with you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I need to talk to Marion.
Yeah.
But all of us, and myself included, you know, I grew up in an environment where I was conditioned to not borrow money. So we never borrowed money. We paid cash for whatever we needed to have. I was brought up in an environment that valued safety and security and certainty, which is kind of the opposite of entrepreneurial life or self-employed life. And so I often think about those beliefs, that conditioning is an inhibitor for me to, you know, really do bigger stuff or scale or take on 7 figures of debt, which lots of entrepreneurs do, to risk it all.
I agree with that so much.
To have a go.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about this because my parents were very open about money and I was very grateful for that, and they always spoke about it like a tool, but something that they did kind of try and instill was like, you need to have a job and a stable job. And even now that like I'm doing all this fun stuff, they're still like, but like, can you go and get a job if you need one? Are you sure you don't want a job still? And it's like, no, I don't really want a job, thanks. But it's interesting that it's always kind of hanging there being like, oh, but is this like safe enough? Should you get a job at some point? But it's interesting.
It's so hard when you have to defend something that you've chosen to do.
You're not even like sure about as well. Like I'm kind of just going with it now and they're like, we don't know.
Yeah, because you want people to support you in the decisions that you've made. And I've had that quite a bit in my life as well, like where I've got questioned, like why, you know, I played roller derby for many years. And for me,
roller derby?
Roller derby, yeah. Full contact sport on roller skates, yes.
Okay. Hectic roller skating.
Yeah. I loved it. And I spent so much time doing it, so much money doing it. And it wasn't something that brought me money. I mean, I was coaching at one point. So I had some money coming in from that, but I would like do my work in order to go, like work, I got paid, and then I would spend that money to go do roller derby. And, you know, it was camaraderie. I'd had friends. It was good for my athletic kind of life. And often my parents would be like, well, why are you doing this? Why are you spending all this time? But it was like a passion for me. And I kept having to defend those things. And you realize how many other things are there in your life that you might be exceptional at if you had people who are more supportive.
Yeah, who showed that it was possible.
Yeah, where it's like, great, do something you love. Great, you're doing roller derby coaching. Why not? Great, push that forward. Sometimes I like to think where I would have ended up.
Completely different life.
This is a good note for both of us as parents, as a mother of a son who's almost 17 and who's thinking about university. And I have to remind myself, that it's his journey and whatever he chooses to do that he finds valuable, you know. I'm like, but it would be really good if you studied this.
Yeah, my dad made me a spreadsheet with all the points weighed against the courses I was thinking about. And I was like, okay, cool. I can see what you want me to do.
Yeah. And did you do it?
No, his highest ranking was physio and I did OT. And OT is very close to physio.
Close enough.
Yeah, almost.
Almost there. Close enough. But you're doing great things because your son's investing, right?
Yeah, my son. Does he ring you and bother you?
No. He, it was so cute because we got connected, so I helped him set up his Perler account.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
I think your children, Anna, are going to be so good because they listen to the podcast already. Yeah. And they're still teeny tiny.
Yeah, my kids. Yeah, they call Tash Cash.
Yeah.
They're like, look, it's
Tash Cash.
Yeah.
It's your friend Cash.
That could be a good stage name.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to some of the tips, I know that like I've heard you talk at like Ladies Finance Club about women getting into their first property. I know there's a lot of, we have a lot of people who listen to the show who are 40s, 50s, you know, who feel as though they're like, oh, is it too late for me to invest? Is it too late for me to buy property?
Even younger people my age being like, is it worth buying property? Should I just rent forever?
Yeah. So if
Or
people
they feel they have to.
yeah, because there's a lot of it's challenging. It's challenging in this.
So we should probably talk about that because there's a real conversation to be had. So I think for Tash, I don't know how old you are. Sorry.
I'm 26, almost 27.
All right, like half of my age almost, right? So I really want to be clear about this because when I started buying property, we're talking about, almost 30 years ago, the landscape was different. And I think the listeners need to hear this. Buying a property was like 2 or 3 times your annual salary and that's it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that because I always have like my dad being like, oh, kids these days are so lazy. And you're like, dude, it was very different for you.
Yeah. And the reality is that properties exponentially went up in value. And it's not that our parents or grandparents were brilliant investors or they studied the data. Yeah. They were just lucky based on the economic climate at that time. When you consider inflation, wage increase, property prices, it just all worked back then and it was a lot easier. I have colleagues my age who are very successful university lecturers, business owners, professionals, and they don't own property. They don't have their own property. And we need to understand that now the average property price is 7 to 10 times the average salary. That's a game changer.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. But I also find it so hard when people get scared by those stats as well because there still are options and I'm sure you'll talk about.
Yes.
I think some people hear that and then they just that's not for me. I'm going to tune out because it's too hard now.
Yeah, too hard about
But yeah, my first property was 3 times my income because I bought in Perth. There still are options, but I'm sure you'll get into that.
Yeah, no, and exactly. And so I work with women in their prime and I'm always helping women in their 40s.
When you say prime...
Prime is 40 plus.
Okay, 40 plus.
I love that.
But
I'm in my prime now officially.
Are you in your prime?
40. Woo, yeah.
I think it's a more dignified term than saying older women.
Yeah.
I love it. It's
it's great.
Good language.
Just need a definition, but 40 plus.
Women in their prime. But I'm helping Tash, women in their prime. I helped an artist about 18 months ago who's in her early 50s who had never owned property in her life buy her first property.
Amazing.
Yeah? So in terms of different ways to get into the market, but I think it's just, it's important for people to know that the market is different now and 7 to 10 times your average salary doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you because you haven't been able to get into the property market. Yeah. There are many alternate ways and I'm a big advocate. And if you've seen any of my stuff on socials, I'm always sharing stories of women where everyone told them it was impossible. The banks told them it was impossible. Advocates told them it was impossible.
The news tells you, the media tells you.
Yep, the media tells you, the news tells you.
That does a thing on your mental health being I just can't. Everyone's told me I can't.
Yeah, it's not available to you. That was an option 20 years ago, not an option for you.
Unless you earn $300,000, you can't do it. That's articles I see these days, which is terrifying.
Yeah, but you can do it is the good news. And actually Molly Benjamin from Ladies Finance Club and myself created a program over a year ago called Buy, Get Ready program. And we took many people through that program and the end result for them was they were able to buy their first property where they were told it wasn't possible. So what are some of the strategies today that you might consider if you're sitting here listening and thinking, all the properties I like when I look at realestate.com are actually 15 times more than what I earn.
Yeah,
not just 7 to 10, right?
Yeah.
So there's rent vesting, and I'm sure you girls have heard that term before, and that's where we buy where we can afford to buy to get into the market, and then we live where we want to live.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And we put tenants in that property. Now, I shared a case study just recently where we helped a woman buy a stunning property, 1,000 square meters, beautiful home, white picket fence, as an investment, rent vesting, and the purchase price was $350,000.
Nice.
Much more affordable than the 2 million
That's
properties.
Right. Yeah. So there's rent vesting, and actually that's my story because I started investing in commercial property and then I went on to buy residential property and I was rent vesting. I was buying properties but living in other places. And as those properties went up in value later in life, I bought my family home, which was a 7-figure acquisition, but I didn't need to take a 7-figure loan because of my rent vesting journey. The other thing that's become really on trend now, and we're actually seeing a number of businesses in the Australian PropTech space come about, is co-buying. Now, I shared with you already that my first 3 acquisitions, my first 3 properties, which was 2 commercial properties in Collins Street, Melbourne, and a heritage house in Hawthorne, were bought in partnership with somebody else. So that's another way if you're listening. And there's a great TV show called it's an Australian series. It's the best.
The people moved in and they bought a house together.
They meet at a wedding.
Yeah.
They're all on the singles table.
Yeah.
They get drunk.
What's it called? We don't know. Look it up.
Is it 5 bedrooms?
I only watched a few episodes, but it's there's so much drama because they all move into this house. There's heaps of problems. Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
I'm looking it up.
It's an Australian series and they meet at a wedding. They're on the singles table. They get drunk together. They're complaining about property prices. And
5 bedrooms, yeah.
5 bedrooms. And they all buy this magnificent property together. So co-buying is a real thing, and we're seeing more and more co-buying, not just between partners, as in, romantic partners, but we're seeing co-buying between friends. We're seeing groups form, cohorts of people, friends, relatives, co-buying.
I've seen single moms buy places together, and then their kids can grow up together as well, having a support network, which is great.
Absolutely. So that's another way to enter into the market. And then there's various different schemes in terms of grants and fundings and things like that you can access. But I think when you start talking like that example that I gave earlier, that woman's story was she was the woman that purchased the $350,000 property. She was a Melbourne woman with a child with special needs, single mother, sole income provider, and she could buy a property in another state. So it was in Adelaide, it wasn't in Melbourne that she bought, for $350,000. So that's doable.
And it provides some security for her and her future and her kid to know that there's a property that they potentially own that hopefully will go up in value. And worst case scenario, potentially they can move into it, right?
Yes, true. And the other thing is, with something like that is, if you think that property, I think the rental that she was getting on it, would generate about $22,000 a year. But if she chose to Airbnb because it was in walking distance to the CBD, instead of earning $22,000 a year, she could earn $60,000 a year. And when you do the math, if you bought the property for $350,000 and you're able to pay $60,000 off a year off that mortgage, it's only a couple of years before you actually own that property and you have the equity to go again, to buy the next property and so on.
So did she do that Airbnb route?
No, she hasn't Airbnb'd yet, but it was when we purchased it. It was purchased with the financial disclosure of being run as an Airbnb.
Oh,
so that's why I quote that figure because it was generating that much money.
So it's possible. Yeah.
It's totally possible. Yeah.
There's always an interesting ethical conversation around Airbnbs and taking things off the rental market, but it's interesting to hear the other side of who that's actually helping because I think people view it as like evil businessmen are taking all these properties and renting them as Airbnbs, but really it's like a single mum who needs security as well.
I think that's one lens. I think that lens is probably come from the government lens who's imposing, restrictions on Airbnb. But there's another lens also. There are people that often need emergency accommodation. Our family had a situation recently with an insurance claim and everyone was displaced from the home and they needed urgent accommodation. Where are they going? They're going to an Airbnb. Yeah. There are many lenses.
It's interesting seeing like the sentiment on social media around landlords and owning property, and it's quite interesting to see how that changes because initially people were really mad at me for owning one property and they're like, you should just sell it. But now it's changing a little bit and people are like, oh, landlords are selling their properties and now there's no rentals. So it's interesting seeing how that conversation changes as people kind of learn more or see more happening.
So true. I've had, I was on a podcast called The 1%. So the 1% in property are people who own 6 or more properties. And then I got all these messages saying not very nice things about being a capitalist and, you're harming the housing situation and what have you. And I'm like, well, actually, I think the number is that only 8% of social housing is provided by the government.
Yeah.
So then who do they think is going to provide all the other housing?
And they're not building enough new ones either. Like they've stopped for a while.
For the 27 million Australians that need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
So, the argument can fall anyway, I guess.
And what's the other option? Do you want the government to own the property? Because that hasn't worked in other places. I just don't see what the other solution is. And it's really hard if you're in that situation where you feel like you're locked out of the property market. But it's hard when people start attacking individuals for that.
Well, even another situation I was thinking, we have space to like potentially put in a suite in our house, or, you know, a granny flat. Like people always want to do things like that, right? Yeah. I love that stuff, because then it's like you can rent it out. You can maybe have additional money. You can help someone with housing.
The social side of it when you've got kids as well, to be like meet all these fun people, all these random people.
For sure. But then the other side is that potentially affects your capital gains if it's your property that you're living in, you know, so the government in some ways needs to think of alternative ways where people can create properties for people to live in and make it okay, right?
I love what you're saying, because this has been a conversation recently that I've had with the guy that owns Shed House. And if you don't know what Shed House is, look it up. You'll fall in love. They're these just Insta-worthy, incredibly designed, like the Great Australian Shed, but they're actually houses. And we were talking about the notion that now that they've made it that you can put a granny flat in without a permit, these things can just, you know, be prefabricated and drop straight in, and they're aesthetically stunning.
They're so nice. Yeah. Like, how is that?
They're aesthetically.
Imagine that in your backyard.
And then, you know, think about, just continuing on from that, think about the pensioner right now who's living in the big property, and they can't downgrade because to sell the property and to purchase a new one, there would be stamp duty implications, selling implications. But they're sitting in their house, they're lonely, they've got a massive backyard. It's not in use.
And you know who needs it? The families. You know, the families with the small kids who want the backyard. Exactly. There needs to be some kind of thought put into how do we position people and move people into spaces that are better fitted for them, right? In the same way that when I was younger, I was happy to rent because I wanted to live close to the city. I wanted to be near the action. Now I'm happy to live in the burbs because in the burbs. I'm a burb mom riding my van. I don't have a van, but not yet. But it's important, right? Because this is an economic issue.
It's an economic issue. It's a social issue. It's a human issue.
It's a policy issue. It's all of them.
It's a dignity issue. For sure. And that's a one-day podcast.
Yes. Yeah. We'll have to have you back. Yeah.
Mm. I just want to touch on financial abuse really quickly. I feel like it doesn't get spoken about enough because it's not a very fun topic. You mentioned co-owning property with people. That kind of like is a great idea for some, but raises a few red flags, I think, in terms of security as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think co-owning property with a partner, the default traditional way, which is as joint tenants, poses more as a risk, or of a risk, to be honest with you. For anyone listening, when you purchase a property, if you purchase as joint tenants, what that essentially means is that if you were to die, then your part of the ownership of the property defaults to the other person. And if they were to die, and so on. Whereas co-buying, where people are consciously thinking about, okay, we're going to buy together. What do we need to set up so we're both safe? Let's purchase as tenants in common, where let's say, the three of us buy and we decide let's do it 33.3% and we'll own that portion each as tenants in common. And then we have that layer of protection that we actually own our portion and you can't take our portion. But going back to the financial abuse thing, it's not spoken about enough. And there is a misbelief that it happens to people in low social economic environments. And I want to tell you here today, I've been sitting at the coalface for 10 years. I've coached hundreds, if not thousands of people. It is in all of the places. It's in the affluent suburbs. We call it the golden handcuffs. It is in the low social economic areas. It is in the educated homes. It is everywhere. And financial abuse, I don't know what people think their understanding is of financial abuse. When you say the term financial abuse.
Do you have a definition?
Well, it's so many things. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
As we've seen with recently the new legislation around coercive control, that wasn't understood. What is that? People would say. Financial abuse is so many things. I mean, the obvious being restricting somebody's access to money or controlling their ability of how they use money. But it can be something as subtle and sophisticated as enforcing debt on another person by, let's say you're with a partner and they earn $300,000 and, you earn $70,000. And they're like, I want to go and live in this particular place. This happened to one of my clients and we need to split the cost 50-50. And she really wanted to be with this person, like really cared about them. And she was working her backside off to try and be able to, that was imposed debt. Yeah, that was emotionally imposed debt. You know, financial abuse can be your partner coercing you to take debt out in your name, you know, credit cards, personal loans, etc. It can be somebody asking you to put the rent, the lease in your name and all of the utilities in your name. It can be so subtle and nuanced, and then it can be so overt where someone's literally taking every cent you own and quarantining the money, and it goes into a specific bank account. And I think people should just be aware it doesn't just happen to uneducated or low social economic people. It can happen to even the smartest of us. And I think when you're emotionally involved with someone, like when there are heartstrings involved, or when you're really in love with someone, or you're in an intimate partner relationship, that's where the risk is, yeah? Because you're likely to do things that cognitively don't make any sense that you wouldn't normally do, but you'll do them because there's the emotional tie of the relationship and not wanting to lose the connection of the relationship.
I've seen it come, like I've read a lot of fiction books. I love a good drama fiction book, but I've seen financial abuse come up more and more recently in some of the newer novels I've been reading. And it's great that it's getting a bit more recognition and it's being part of stories. And they're not just books like about financial abuse. It would just be one of the characters has it happened to them. And it's quite interesting seeing how that progresses and how they frame it in different ways. And like the recent one I read was called The Drowning Woman, and it was someone in a huge mansion.
The Drowning Woman?
Yeah, The Drowning Woman. It looked like she was had this perfect life. Her husband was really successful. She was in this massive mansion, but really he was just controlling her completely. And it got a bit more dramatic than normal real life stuff. Lots of fun things happened, but yeah, it was interesting seeing it portrayed that way.
But that is real life stuff in the affluent suburbs of Melbourne. That is.
Oh yeah, that's real life, not the murders that happened later. Yeah, they were setting people up and everything. But yeah, the financial abuse was seemed really real.
I remember once saying to a woman who I was connected to through school socially. She was sharing with me the challenges that she was having, which were all quite toxic, abusive behaviors. And we were standing in her home, and she'd just gone down and she was showing me the wine cellar. And my obvious response was like, you need to leave. Like this is, and she said, look around you. And I was like, yep. And she was like, where would I go? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where would I go? Where would the kids go? We live in this suburb. It was a very affluent suburb. Our kids go to this school. We drive this car. And we have this status. Where would I go? And that is financial abuse. When, yes, she has access to everything, and yes, her husband clears the credit card every month, but she can't actually leave.
No, without disrupting their lives completely. I think that's such a huge decision to make.
Well, she would be leaving into poverty because that would be the unspoken financial abuse, which was what she was saying to me is, I know if I was to make that call, we'd be living in a one-bedroom flat catching public transport. Like that's the harsh reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I think back to some of our family friends and seeing so much of this growing up and it being so normalized, and then being an adult and talking to my cousins or family friends where these same people are in the same relationships, and you see, this paycheck goes into this account and it pays for all the household stuff. And this paycheck goes into this account and we don't know where it's gone. You know what I mean? Maybe it's paid off the mortgage, but who knows if it's invested? Who knows if it's this? And there's no access to this account, right? And then you see the kids of those parents having very similar financial beliefs because it hasn't been talked about, right? Like it hasn't been talked about why this is right or wrong or what's a red flag. And then you see the same things happen. And that's why it's so important to unpack those things. And are those couples still together? Absolutely they are. Because it's so hard to leave. Like, where do you go? Back to that point, where do you go?
Economic codependence is really a thing.
Yeah.
And, as a woman who's 54, as I said, almost next month, it's a big thing. It's a big determining factor about the choices later in life as a woman that you will make when you're going to be impacted economically. And I was just thinking about what you're saying then when I talk to family lawyers. And, the work they do in uncovering layers of financial non-disclosure and, there's another $2 million of assets where you didn't know about.
Yeah.
And there's a few more properties. Oh, and by the way, there's this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely hard. I think it's important that we're talking about it because some of the things that you've even just mentioned in terms of financial abuse doesn't get talked about enough. Like we might not see it every day. And it's just a little bit by little like, oh, listen, we should go 50-50, even though I make 3 times more than you. Yeah. Or these little things. That's why talking about finances is so important as well, right?
I agree. And I know a woman who, she's very educated, and her husband is a company director and had her sign some documentation, and then the company went bankrupt. And yes. And whatever she signed, she's in love, right? It's her husband.
Yeah.
And whatever she signed has had detrimental impacts on her life after he left. It is important to talk about it. And there's so much shame though, and there's so much embarrassment. And I've sat at the coalface with women who've lived the effect of financial abuse. And the hardest thing is the embarrassment and the shame. So I think it's great that we're talking about it.
Yeah. To wrap it up, because this has been a hectic conversation. We've covered so much. It's been
a good hectic conversation.
I've loved it all. What's one tip you have for someone who is starting again or starting from scratch now?
Yeah, just one tip.
You can have 3 tips if you'd like.
Or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is, successful people ask for help and get the support that they need. Mm-hmm. There's a great shame often in asking for help. And I'm the first to publicly share that I have mentors, I have coaches, I have trainers, I have cheerleaders. And if I didn't have all of those things, I couldn't do half of what I did. So that would be the first thing. Successful people ask for help and get the support that they need. I would say for me, I'm always going to come back to, as a certified money coach who sits in the, behavioral science, psychology of money space, get a really strong understanding of the story that you're telling yourself and how you're living through that story. Because if you're starting all over again, that in itself tells you that, perhaps what you've been doing to date is not actually working for you. And what is it that you need to do differently? And how do you need to think about yourself, others, in the world differently so that you can have different outcomes? And then I'm always going to say this, people like to make building wealth complicated and difficult and complex. And it's simply spend less than you earn and buy assets that go up in value over time that have the capacity to produce a passive income. And it's very underwhelming, I know, and it's very simplistic, but that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why we're called the Get Rich Slow Club, because that's the way to do it. Definitely.
Totally. So that would be my guidance. Get the support and help you need. Check yourself, meet reality where it's at. Yeah. And start spending less than you earn and start buying assets.
Yeah. And what was your sentence? Stop getting in your own way.
Yeah. Stop getting in your own way. Well, get out of your own way. Yeah. Right? Get out of your own way.
Yeah, for sure. And where can people find you?
So unfortunately, you can put Marion Mays in Google and way too much information comes up. And that's not really good if you're single and you want to date, right? It's not. But Money Strong. So we launched our new brand this year after 10 years, Thalia Stanley Group, which was named in honor of my mum Thalia and my dad Stanley. We rebranded this year to Money Strong. We haven't had the official launch yet, but you can just find us at moneystrong.com.au.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing so much. This was great.
That was a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club or Tash at Tash Invests or me at Ana Cristina.
This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is an authorized representative 1299881 of Guideway Financial Services, AFSL 420367, and Perla, who is an authorized representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. So make sure you check out our financial services guides and read the product disclosure statement and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info.